Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Nicole Hickl, your evening anchor for CBS 4 at 5, 6, and 10, and welcome to my weekly segment, Mental Health Unmasked. For those who have been following me, you know it all started as a video with no makeup, in my pajamas at my house, revealing at the beginning of June that I suffer with depression and anxiety. So now we're taking it a step further, and we want to educate the public and let people know that they are not alone. So joining me today, I have Dr. James Wittenberg, who is a licensed professional counselor, and he also works with the graduate program at UTRGV. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you. I want to first start with one of those common sayings that we've probably all heard. It's all in your head.
Well, in a way that's true, but not the way that people normally ask. So there definitely is a biological component to mental illness.
Yeah, and you shared a great image with me of the brain, and it's amazing to see just how many different chemicals we have in our brain that affects our emotions.
Absolutely. The brain is a very complex organ with billions of neurons, and they have to communicate with each other in order to function, and they communicate via electrical impulses. And those impulses are pushed by chemicals that we call neurotransmitters. And those neurotransmitters are, the various levels impact many aspects of our lives, including mental health.
Yeah, and I think the main one that people hear, especially for me, why I am on medication for depression is they're trying to increase my serotonin.
Right.
That's the happy.
Absolutely. But there are also other neurotransmitters where if the levels are not high enough, it can cause depressive symptoms such as epinephrine, norepinephrine, even dopamine, acetylcholine. So that's why many times when individuals take antidepressant medication, the doctor or the psychiatrist, it's kind of a hit or miss, you know, which neurotransmitter does the individual need to have elevated.
Right, and for people who suffer from depression, is most times, is that the serotonin chemical?
Yes, but as I mentioned before, there are others as well. So one of the more common classes of medications are SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, but there are other classes of medications as well that are selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, selective norepinephrine and dopamine reuptake inhibitors. But yes, the most common is the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or
would
SSRI.
you say is the dopamine one that's that sadness?
Yes, so if those levels are low, that does have an impact on a person's joy.
Let's talk a little bit about, so we have this nice image that just shows all those chemicals. With your practice, Heartfelt Minds Counseling in Brownsville, with your clients, do you see people who are hesitant to take medication? Because I know that I was hesitant at first, but then you showed the science behind it and how our brain is built, and it kind of makes sense why medication sometimes is needed, but people are hesitant.
Yes, they are, and probably some of the common reasons are because of potential side effects. And the FDA even has required a black label warning that sometimes symptoms can be worse in the first few weeks before things improve, but that's not always the case for everybody.
Yeah, sometimes it can take weeks. I think for me it took about 3 months before I noticed something. So it does, you have to have patience, and I'm sure that's what you tell your clients too, is when you walk in that first session, you made that first hurdle, which is hard to even just get into the therapist's office, but then after that you have to be patient because it's session after session after session. It's just building onto a positive path.
Absolutely, and as you mentioned earlier, I'm also an assistant professor in the Department of Counseling at the university, so I teach those graduate students who want to become school counselors or licensed professional counselors, and one of the first things we tell them working with clients is to give them a compliment and to thank them for coming in, because not everyone has the courage to come in and seek help.
Yeah, definitely. And then, you know, sometimes they could be feeling down at their lowest, and that compliment could be that boost that they needed to reaffirm that they made the right decision. You have another diagram for it. It's the multi-path model, and this shows just the different things that are involved with how mental disorders come about. There's so many different outside sources, what's going on in your brain, family, everything.
That's correct. So mental illnesses such as depression, anxiety, and others are not just biological in nature. And there is a theory out there called the diathesis stress theory. And essentially what that theory says is there's a biological and hereditary component to mental illness, but the symptoms don't always emerge until the environmental stress impacts the individual, and then those symptoms emerge. And one of the classic examples would be schizophrenia, which usually doesn't emerge until late adolescence, early adulthood, around in the 20s. And there are a lot of changes in an individual's life at that time, and those environmental stressors perhaps cause those images to emerge at that time.
And what would you say would trigger someone's depression? Because like you said, it's hereditary, so if your parents have it, you may have it. So it might just take maybe one life-changing event that would just trigger it, and then you're left trying to figure out, where do I go from here?
Every individual is different, and sometimes it can be due to events that have happened in childhood that have been left unprocessed. There's a part of the brain called the limbic system, and sometimes the brain will take a snapshot of an event that happened and file it away, and the person doesn't process it, and eventually later it begins to be processed in bits and pieces, and for everybody it comes out in different ways. For some it might be anger, for some it might be depression, for some it might be anxiety, for some it might be a phobia or obsessive compulsive symptoms.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head with that one, that it just, I've realized even with myself, there could be something that happened 4 or 5 years ago, you never got to grief or process it.
Yes.
And then finally, when life slows down, it's like your brain's like, oh, here, you forgot to look at this, and it just shows it in front of you, and sometimes it feels like your world is crashing down. So how can people, move forward from that? I'm sure a lot of it is you just have to change the way you think.
Yes, that's important, and also not to be afraid to ask for help. Initially from friends and family, and then eventually from a professional who's been trained in helping an individual with their patterns of thinking and maladaptive behaviors.
When would you think is a time for someone who might be watching right now, who may be thinking, oh, I think I am, this sadness is not going away. When is the time to seek help? I'm sure the earlier the better.
Absolutely. It's never too early. When friends and family begin to notice that you're not being yourself, whenever an individual is not enjoying the activities that they usually like in life, when the individual has changes in their eating patterns and sleeping patterns, those are some of the very early signs that you should go ahead and seek help.
How would you approach someone? I know a lot of family members are like, I don't know. Even some people told me whenever I went public with my depression, they were just like, I thought something was wrong, but I didn't know how to approach you.
Right. It can be very challenging, but in the same manner that you would approach somebody who has warning signs of suicide, you want to come out and directly ask the question because you don't want them to follow through. The same with depression or anxiety. I see that through your behaviors that you have difficulty with your depression. I think you need some help.
Right.
Would you agree? It's that simple.
And then even try to assist and help them set up the appointment.
Oh, absolutely, because many times the individual's not thinking clearly.
Yeah.
And they do need the help even setting up appointments.
Yeah, I didn't set up my first appointment, so I'm happy that someone set it up for me. Let's talk about the ABC theory. Now, this last, well, there's many multitudes of what we could address, but this one really just shows your thought process.
Right, and there are many different theories of psychotherapy and counseling. You know, some stem back from Freud and some are more modern, but one of the ones that really resonates is cognitive behavioral therapy. And one of the experts in our field was Albert Ellis, and he developed a specific type called rational emotive behavior therapy. And part of that, he developed what he called an ABC model that he would actually teach to his clients and patients. That way they could understand the thought process. And essentially what he said was that persons have a tendency to kind of disturb themselves, but they also have the ability to dispute those irrational thoughts.
Right, and I think the example on this one is I lost my job, and you could just take it as I'm worthless because I lost my job, or you can think this is just a bump in the road. Absolutely.
So the A is the activating event, and in this case it is the individual who lost his or her job. But the issue is the B, the irrational belief, and in this case the belief that because I lost my job, I am worthless. And the consequences, or the C of that, are the negative emotions such as depression and the negative behaviors such as withdrawing from friends and family. And so where the therapist comes in is the D, to dispute those irrational thoughts and works with the client to help them realize, hey, maybe I'm thinking very pessimistic. Right. Maybe I'm not thinking as positively as I could, and I could see things from a different perspective.
And I think that's very true. Even in my own therapy sessions, I might say, 10 different things, and then the therapist will come back and be like, well, you know what? You got this out of this. You got this. Like somehow she found the good in something so bad. And I think that's why the therapists are needed, is because you're right. You're not in your right state of mind. You're just constantly thinking negative thoughts. And people are saying it's in your head. And yes, it's in your head, but like you said, it's in your brain. And there's just so many factors that play a role in the mental disorders that people suffer with.
So many, and going back just very briefly to the antidepressants, what's very interesting in that the neurotransmitters push those electrical impulses is that now we have some new research where some experts believe that the electrical impulses can be pushed through electricity. And they have created devices where you plug the little nodules to your earlobes, and it creates an electrical current to push those neurotransmitters that are at a low level, and it acts in the same manner as antidepressants.
Wow.
Without the side effects.
Wow.
But we're still looking at that research. It's been around maybe 10 years, and the heavy research has only been within the last 4 years, but the device requires a prescription from your doctor.
Right.
It's a class 3 medical device. It only runs on a 9-volt battery, and it works kind of in a similar vein as acupuncture. And that's what it feels like on the earlobes, are just little pricks like needles.
Wow.
And you adjust the intensity to whatever level that you can tolerate,
right,
and is helpful to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Do you have any last minute advice for those who may be watching and they're on the fence of seeing a therapist or just staying in bed?
Yes. My advice would be to go ahead and seek help. Go ahead and schedule an appointment with a counselor or a psychologist and see if that works for you. And it may take time. You may not develop that therapeutic relationship right away. You may have to find a second or a third therapist, but that's the most important component. The therapeutic relationship, that way the individual feels comfortable about sharing with the therapist, so the therapist in turn can help them.
Yes, you need to build that trust and rapport.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Wittenberg, for joining us. And this is a topic we're covering every Friday, Mental Health Unmasked. You can follow me on social media if you have any ideas of what you would like to cover next. A few things I'm working on is a segment on self-care. And another one, my therapist will be coming on the show shortly. So just send me a message on Facebook. You've been doing so already. Have a great day, everyone. Remember to spread love, raise awareness, and start the conversation. I'll see you on CBS 4 Valley at 5.